Okay, so welcome to Parashat Vayechi, and I'm absolutely delighted to have Evan Israel Strauss with us, particularly because you very kindly came in last minute to fill in a space that was created. So thank you so much, firstly, for moving in so quickly and allowing us to come in and to record this in your beautiful home. So Evan, I've known you from when I first came to Tzfat some 7 years ago. I met you. Tell us a little bit about what's happened in your life. What are you working on at the moment?
Oh, at the moment, or what's happened in my life? So I'll just jump back and tell my story very, very quickly. And I'll look at you. So I came to, well, how do I want to say this? Where do I want to start? It's hard to know where to start in one's life. So how about this? I'll start with, I came to Tzfat in 1992 after finishing university and spending about 8 months in an ashram in California. Having explored yogic practice, but also recognizing the religious limitations of some of these places, that there was a religious component, and my interest was not about finding a religion, it was about methodologies for expanding consciousness and for getting deeper self-insight, but also higher consciousness. I came to Israel in 1992 and found myself exploring different yeshivot. Back in those days, there weren't that many of the so-called Bali Tshuva Haredi yeshivot. One of my interesting paths on that was I was given a message that it's great you got here, everything you learned got you here, but now it's time to let all that go. Stop listening to your inner intuitive knowing, which got you here, and Baruch Hashem, you got here, and now it's time to bittul yourself to a path of Torah that we're going to teach you. That was the message that I received, and that was a very common message, I believe. And it was a message that didn't sit very well with me, actually. But I spent time in Israel from 92 to about 1996 studying in yeshivot. I was never a very good bacher. I spent a lot of time, though, in the hills at holy places with special people, and that's really what rooted me to this place. I left in 1996, went to America to spend some time in a Jewish renewal rabbinical program, which I dropped out of immediately, having spent time in Israel and recognizing what I felt were the limitations of that movement. And then I went to India for almost a year as a way to kind of revisit and go more deeply into particularly getting certain methodologies that I didn't quite accomplish when I was younger. And then went to graduate school. I got a master's in clinical psychology, got licensed as a master's level psychotherapist. And then with my wife and 2 young kids, we made Aliyah in 2007, so a little 15 and a half years ago. So part of what's interesting, I think, is as I approach Judaism, I do not renounce the yogic practices that I learned. In fact, I consider them very valuable tools that I bring into my tefillah, into my meditations, my hitbodedut, my hitbonedut, my limud, and I choose not to see them as tuma, to be rejected, but rather tools, sparks from the nations to be brought in. Perhaps even some of the shemot that were given by Avraham Avinu to the Bnei Keturah, which Rashi says were shemot tumot, aval, there are opinions that say no. They were names to be used while in a land of Tumah and in a state of Tumah, which is very different. So that brings me here. So I have a clinical practice where I work with clients. My wife and I bought and renovated an old home, which is now a successful bed and breakfast, and I raise family, and I still spend a lot of time wandering the hills. In fact, I met an old rabbi, an old tzaddik in the hills, deep in the hills one day, and he said to me, every Dalet Amot in Eretz Israel that you walk is a mitzvah. So I embrace that practice. So
I remember this is a great feeling for me, because I remember coming into this very room and doing my first serious meditation of about 45 minutes. And I got such a download with your direction. It was a brilliant download that I got. So good memories. So let's dive straight into Parashat Vayechi, and it is the last parasha in Bereshit, which I'm kind of upset about, because I just love the stories of Bereshit. I think there's so much to learn from it, and it's all about Yaakov giving blessings to his children. And And the first thing we noticed in the podcast was that Yaakov lived the last 17 years of his life, from the age of 30 to 147, in Egypt, and it's described as life, the years of tranquility. And the first thing that the Alshech says, which is amazing, and I wanted to understand the deeper psychological implication of this, that if the last part of your life is tranquil, you kind of are able to retrospectively color the first part of your life with the same brush. How does that work psychologically?
Okay, well, I would, if I could just take that same concept and rephrase it slightly through my own understanding, that, for example, within cognitive behavioral therapy, the way in which we interpret our reality, the way we perceive and then make associations based upon those perceptions, has a huge impact on how we experience what's happening. And so people who carry a lot of pain and sadness are prone to find those kinds of painful situations and interpret them in their relationships
in
the present time. And there's something that we call a cognitive restructuring. We want to understand what are the narratives, we would use this expression, the cognitive narratives, the belief systems that I'm carrying that influence the way I'm interpreting reality. I start to learn inside myself where my own kind of skewed, what we call cognitive distortions, my own skewed interpretations, where they are coming from my own past, from my own, and then in the present moment, using meditative-like tools such as mindfulness, I become aware of my vulnerabilities for misinterpretation. And then I'm able to sort of catch myself before I allow my interpretation to sort of interpret some kind of negative phenomenon that may or may not be there. And we all do this in marriage, we all do this all the time, and to different varying degrees based upon our experiences, based upon what we're carrying. And one thing we see our avot as these great tzaddikim, and as even part Sufim of great Kabbalistic structures, Yaakov, Israel, Zeranpin, and yet on a human level, right, the loss of your beloved child skewing. So he's living in Eretz Israel with a beautiful family, and yet something's coloring that experience, that he's disconnected from Shekhinah, we say, right? And then the recovery of his relationship with his beloved Bachor through Rachel shifts everything, and now he's able to see the world through a different lens, and now the Shekhinah is residing with him again, and now it's tov, it's good.
So let me ask you
this. It seems like that's what you're
but I want to really laser point this point, and that is this as follows. When he's in Egypt and he's reunited with Yosef, it's not to say that he didn't have those traumas. Those traumas happened in his life. We're not saying they weren't traumas. They were traumatic and they affected him greatly. But what is it that allows him to let go of the trauma in this current present state, that allows you to just let go of that terrible burden of carrying all those traumas with us in the present? That's really what I want to get at.
Right. And I wish I had an easy answer for that. Now, for the story of Yaakov Yisrael, it does seem to me the rediscovery that his son is alive and is married with children, and not only that, the position he's in, I think, enables a certain kind of shift out of the place where he seemed to be. But on a kind of broader, maybe more, what do we learn from this? I do think that's the task, is we're all carrying things that could very easily lead us to interpret things through a kind of a depressive lens, right? And how do we find a way of relating to it? To find, there are so many avenues towards that. Whether it's an avenue of emunah, gamzu latova, right? This kind of approach. Ultimately, God is everything has been orchestrated for my own soul's growth, for my gilgulic needs, and so that kind of emunah. But it's so easy to say, and I think that's one of the tasks of life. And if I had an easy answer, I think I'd be lying.
But is it correct to say the following, that trauma is defined as trauma when we disagree with how events occurred. In other words, we have a plan of what we think should happen to our lives, and it didn't, and that can potentially, depending on the degree of dissonance, can create trauma. And if that's the case, is the solution, as my dear mentor Yoel Tujerman expressed it to me, and I wanted to present it to you, is the solution as simple as saying, from my eyes, it was traumatic, but from God's perspective, it was all good because it had to happen that way for all those reasons. And now that it has happened and I've arrived at the final destination, I can now look back through God's eyes, so to speak, and then redefine the events which are neutral as good.
Right. Look, there are numerous Hasidic stories about this. Of the Maggid of Mezrich, on my deathbed, I'm going to go petition HaKadosh Baruch Hu to bring Geula because there's so much suffering. Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev also made the same promise. And then inevitably, when they go to Lamala and look down, they come to the realization that everything was as it needs to be. Right. Yet, my understanding from the Talmud is that that is absolutely true from the highest level, and yet when someone is in their world of suffering, we are forbidden to approach them and tell them these kinds of hashkafot, because their suffering is real, and we need to respond to their suffering, not provide beautiful spiritual ideals to help them transcend or sublimate their suffering, meaning, this is my understanding. Even though, so for ourselves, I believe that's absolutely the right attitude. For others, I actually, as a therapist, it's not a therapeutic approach to try and help someone necessarily jump right through to seeing the silver lining in their pain, because it's an essential stage.
It's
to
a
be
process
present.
to go there.
It's
you just have to be there to listen to them. That's part of the therapy, is to listen to them.
To listen to them and to... Because so much, the avoidance of real pain creates neurotic pain.
Correct.
The neurotic pain is oftentimes more complicated to treat and move away from than the experience of the actual pain itself.
Correct. But
now trauma, when we talk about clinical trauma, acute trauma, now this is a little bit different. When somebody's been physically or sexually abused, and this kind of trauma gets stored inside brain structures and creates a whole phenomenon that's a little bit, that's related but different to this. So there's trauma used as a colloquial expression, and then there's sort of clinical acute trauma. And sometimes that distinction, the way we talk about things, isn't really sufficiently parsed out.
What's your view on the idea that often, especially in the Western society, we tend to linger too long perhaps in that state of suffering and feeling the pain, and that makes it harder to move out of that. What's your view on that?
Right. So, from the clinical psychological point of view, for example, when someone comes to a therapist in mourning, there is a time period, usually like 6 to 8 months, where diminishment of functioning, depressive mood, these are normal responses to mourning, to loss, and they're not to be labeled as pathological phenomenon. It's only after a certain amount of time has passed where the adjustment hasn't begun that we start to talk about some kind of dysfunction, some kind of neurotic process happening. So there is right there, and the truth is, it's very cute for the Diagnostic Statistical Manual to set a time.
Right.
8 months, 6 to 8 months. The truth is, everyone's different and everyone's process is different. But there is a notion that we can get stuck in our pain, and it no longer really serves us, and there seems to be something blocking the healthy re-entry into life, I would say, is the way to describe it.
I mean, I guess if you were to speak to Yaakov when he was still in Israel and saying, there's going to be time when you're going to see this as okay, he wasn't able to be consoled at all. So there's some truth to what you said.
Right, and then of course there's a part of me that gets very nervous when I hear that, because how do we relate to these great avot, and we project our human, how do I want to say this? We might want to deconstruct them to see them through the lens of our own humanity.
Right.
And yet, there is a layer where something like that seems to be happening.
Right. Let's move forward, because we've got such a short time and so much to discuss. This idea that Yaakov was blessing Ephraim and Menashe, and he saw that their prodigy there was some negative outcomes of some of their prodigies, and therefore he wasn't able to bestow on them the full essence of the blessing that he wanted to give them, because he didn't feel that they were at the level to receive it. What's your view on that? I mean, I know it's not in psychological field, but what's your view on that? You know, the fact that we have to build our vessels to be able to receive the bounty of blessings that God wants to give to us.
Well, I absolutely think that's true, right? I mean, in my early days, the early beginner's Kabbalah talks a lot about how Kadosh Baruch Hu is always shining the light, and it's our vessel that determines what we're able to receive or not. And in fact, the work is on building vessels, not receiving light. Right. That's very much a Rav Ashla kind of insight.
Right.
I think that's absolutely true. What it means to build a vessel, that's also a huge conversation.
Well, just give us a touch, because I didn't get a chance to even mention this on the podcast. I just asked the question: how do we build the right vessels to receive the light and blessings from God?
I laugh.
On one
because
leg.
On one leg, and where does one enter that? What is the vessel? So, would you like me to answer that as a Svatnik who spends time immersed in a Chassidut and Kabbalah, or as a psychotherapist?
Well, it's not.
How about let me say the psychotherapist, because the truth is everyone in Svat could answer that to some degree, everyone in their own way, but everyone could take a grasp at that. How about I go back to Freud? Can I go there? Can we go to Freud? He talks about a tripartite structure of the psyche, a threefold structure of the psyche: the id, the ego, the superego, right? He used Latin terms: the id, the ego, and the uber-ego. And I had a great professor who was a student of Erik Erikson, who in turn was a student of Anna Freud, the daughter of Freud. So through that transmission, these languages were just expressions of Freud saying the I, the it, which is the id, and that which is over I. And this was Freud's archetypal cosmology of how to build a vessel to function. And so the I is essentially how I'm interpreting reality. Now that interpreting reality is entirely influenced by the id, which is this biological construct. You know, evolutionary psychologists like to study primates to try and understand the biological evolutionary drives of aggression, sexuality, the desire for power, all these things. You can actually learn a lot by humans, by the its, all of these things programmed in our basic biological drive as an organism. And we are a high level primate, which is offensive to people when you say that, but on a biological level, it's absolutely true. And there are many ways in which our behavior can be understood by watching chimpanzees and gorillas. Of course, we've transcended that, but there are levels. The lowest levels of us are very reminiscent of very civilized primates. Civilized, meaning we wear clothes and we know how to speak, but the same underlying impulses drive us. So in order to be a vessel for the divine, we have to be able to, I think, have awareness of these drives. Not be.
Otherwise, you can't overcome them.
You can't overcome them.
Right.
And it's very tempting to think, I'm a neshama. You know, this idea in graduate school, they like to talk about something called spiritual bypass. I embrace my spiritual identity because my emotional and physical parts of self are so overwhelmingly threatening, create anxiety, are dissonant to the egoic persona of who I would like to believe I am. And so awareness of that process of, for example, these drives is a part of what it means to have a healthy vessel. Now, this other end of it is that which is over I, which are, there are different layers of that. And tell me if I'm going on too long, if you're enjoying this.
I'm really
enjoying it. So the over I is, on the one hand, that's the conditioning we got in our family, the voices of our parents, which are also healthy, there to protect us, guide us, but also neurotic because our own parents were imperfect. We internalize all this stuff, which then we filter in through the sense of who I am. But then there's the higher level of the superego, which is, for example, as an observant Jew, we look at Torah. We look at Chazal. And B'ezrat Hashem, we don't look at them as neurotic voices, but we look at them as voices that give the parameters, the boundaries of how we construct the way we want to behave and what we want to do with all of this stuff, all of these imperatives. Because, I mean, for example, in the secular world, where things like Torah as sort of external objectifiable boundaries that we listen to and object and construct our behaviors and lives around, when that's absent, it's pretty arbitrary what's appropriate, what's not. And in fact, I think Chazal was very ambivalent about the Greeks and the Romans with a lot of the cultural normative things they were doing that we were very uncomfortable with. And the Hellenistic, back to Hanukkah, right? The Hellenistic stories, there are many Jews who started to embrace this more liberal, open worldview. How do we define truth? How do we define that by which we set the boundaries and limitations of our own behaviors, which is also about creating a vessel, right? I feel like I'm rambling on a bit too much.
So go on. Tell me the Tsfat version.
Okay, sorry. So I think, the Tsfat version, I mean, look, the Tsfat version brings me to kind of talking about, obviously, makes me think of voices like in Mesilat Yesharim, ways of self-purification, ways of, through, for example, kosher, which, dietary laws, which, the impure foods, impure, make the heart impure, which makes it hard to distinguish. These are more distinguish right from wrong, kedusha from tumeh. Just because something's spiritually powerful doesn't mean that it's something pure that we should embrace. So Torah, mitzvot, and also here, actually, this brings me a little bit to, if I can jump the Baal Shem Tov on this week's Parsha, if I may, to transition away from the Alshech, with regards to Yisachar in the bracha, right? The text says Yisachar, Chamor, Gorem, Bein Mishpatayim, right? The Yisachar, the donkey that's crouching between the boulders, and the Baal Shem Tov says this. He says, read it like this: Yesh Schar, shechomer, shehachumriut gorem. There's a reward that materiality brings, and that which is crouching between the boulders, these are the fallen sparks. And he talks about with our flesh, im basar achuzapo, with my flesh I grasp onto the Lord. So what does this mean? Why am I talking about this now? Part of building a vessel is through healthy living in relationship with wife, with children, with work, not hiding from the biological, societal necessities of life. And with that, recognizing that this is all avodat Hashem. And so the reward that materiality brings, right? It's very, once again, the spiritual bypass thing, I guess, is a theme I'm talking about tonight. These things are hard, and sometimes it's tempting to try to, in my opinion, and as a therapist, I see this a lot in my practice, wanting to use spiritual justifications for avoiding aspects of life and reality that are part of what it means to be human and what it means to be a Yehudi living in the world, serving Hashem.
Differentiates us from monks and people who just want to
right, and we have, as though, even though we all talk about, no, we don't encourage asceticism, and yet there are ascetic trends inside our tradition that are about to get.
So in the last question I want to tackle here is a really big question that I'm trying to grasp with, because I feel within this question is a gold mine that if we were able to extract, it could really affect our lives greatly to the benefit. And it comes from the blessing of Yehuda, which I didn't get time to explain in the parasha, but basically Yehuda, having heard Yaakov give a blessing to Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, all sort of very derogatory in some respects, that they weren't, they were all blessings. He felt, it's my turn now. He's going to bring up the fact that I was responsible for the sale of Yosef and my Tamar issue, and he starts walking away, and so Yaakov calls him Yehuda in the first tense, which is different from all the others. Come back here, I want to explain to you something. Don't think that what you did was wrong. You actually saved Yosef, because if you hadn't told them to sell Yosef, they would have left him in the pit, and he would have died of starvation. So think of that as a benefit, as a good thing, not a negative thing. So the response from Yehuda is, if that's the case, why is my life being so difficult? I lost my wife. I lost my first son. I lost my second son from the age of 7. I was tricked, so-called, to have a relationship with Tamar. And so the response from the Alshech is so powerful. He says like this, that Yaakov is telling him that part of the reason that his life, that Yehuda's life turned out the way it turned out, was as a premonition of what his children will do, namely King David, and and reference to the dying of his 2 sons was the destruction of the first and second temple, and that really what God wanted for him was for Judah to marry Tamar at the beginning, but he didn't do that because God doesn't interfere with our free will. Judah decides to marry this Canaanite woman who's not even named. She's called the daughter of Shaul, of her father, and God, so to speak, has to reroute Yehuda, and the only way he can do that is through tricking him to have relationship with Tamar, because it's through that union that the messianic root will come out, and God has to find some way of rerouting us to arrive there. And so my question is like this: that what the Alshech through Yaakov is suggesting is that sometimes in our lives, events happened not because of something that happened in the past, that this is the present is an expression of the past and a consequence of the past decisions, but sometimes things happen in our lives because it's the future coming in. The future is determining or influencing present events. I mean, one way my rabbi said it many years ago in London was, we celebrate Pesach. Why do we celebrate Pesach? And he says, well, we celebrate Pesach because we were in Egypt, and this is to commemorate the fact that we left Egypt. But he said, maybe we went to Egypt because in the future we're going to celebrate Pesach. Mm-hmm. So I want to just ask you, is there any experience you have, particularly with the clinical side of things, that you witness how people's current lives are affected by their potential future?
That's an interesting concept. Right? The thing that comes to my mind is I like Jungian psychology. A modern day disciple of Jung wrote a book called The Soul's Code. James Hillman is the author, and he looks at the life of some extraordinary figures of history. Winston Churchill is one of the ones I remember, some famous Spanish matador, whose name I don't recall, how as children they were very fearful and very diminished as people. And this author liked to look at it, not that they were raised with all these neurotic problems which they outgrew, but they sensed what the future was holding for them on some unconscious level, which overwhelmed them by their own future, their own potentiality. That seems relevant to what you're saying. In terms of from a, this is a little different, but from a therapeutic point of view, I think it is really, really helpful and valuable from just a clinical point of view, is when working with clients, is recognizing where we're preventing ourselves from manifesting our potentiality and the potential future we sense. What are we hiding from, and what are the obstacles that enable us to really contemplate and clarify and articulate what we really want? What is the future we can visualize? And I think the clear visualization of potential future realities enables us to manifest them. This is not a causal relationship, so it's not black and white given, but I think this is, I've read a quote somewhere that the universe rewards courage. So this idea of sensing what our future potentiality could be, And then what would that look like, and how would I go about that?
I tell you
That
why I
seems
love
relevant.
I tell you why I love that, because one of my favorite hobbies is to bring people to Tzfat. And I was contemplating this with a friend the other day, why? And I see Tzfat, when you're living in a big city, there's a lot of noise, a lot of turbulence, and it's imagine a lake. When there's a lot of wind, you can see the water, but it's murky. When you come to Tzfat, there's nothing to do here, seemingly. So the water is completely flat. But when the water's flat, you can see a perfect reflection of the mountains and the sky. And so I think when people come to Tzfat, and this is my invitation to all you guys to come here, when you come to Tzfat, the lake is still, and you're able to see the reflection of your soul through the city. And I mean, once you get that reflection, that's the vision of the future, because the soul knows the future is a part of God's spark. So it knows what's to come, and it can sort of download to you, as awesome as it can be sometimes, a little bit of the future that will then influence your present. So thank you for that. I know that you are a keen astrologist, is that right?
So as part of my life journey, I learned ancient Vedic Indian astrology in California, and then in India. I spent a good amount of time with a master astrologer in the Himalayas.
Is there anything in this parasha that you could connect with that teaching?
Well, one of our dear friends, Rabbi Yirmiyahu Levitas, shared with me something from the Gemara talking about Yosef. It's related. Pharaoh's astrologers didn't want to allow Pharaoh to promote this servant to become this viceroy. He came from, who was this person? And the astrologers were saying he must have come from a lowly place. And Pharaoh said to him, no, I can sense he's coming from a very high place. And the astrologers said to Pharaoh, well, if he can speak the 70 languages, then we'll believe he's worthy. And so then the story goes that Yosef didn't know the 70 languages. So that night, Gabriel Hamalach came to Yosef to teach him.
Quick crash course.
And the truth is, and Yosef wasn't able to learn the 70 languages. He was struggling. So what happened? He was given an extra hay, and he became Yehosef, which is interesting. That's not something we know about. Avram became Avraham. Yeshua became Yehoshua. Yosef became Yehosef.
Okay.
And with that extra hay, I was contemplating upper hay, lower hay. I'm not sure. But with that extra hay, suddenly he was given access to the 70 languages. The next morning, Pharaoh interrogated him, discovered he knew all 70 languages. But then Yosef asked Pharaoh, "Do you know Lashon Kodesh?" And Pharaoh didn't know Lashon Kodesh. Right. And so Pharaoh made Yosef take a nader that he would never reveal that Pharaoh was lacking in this. Okay? Anyway, that's a little astrological midrash, perhaps. But the truth is, there's much astrological content within the Talmud.
How do you feel with the phrase that "En mazal l'Israel"?
This actually, so this is a complicated subject, which I think is related to, in my mind, when you were talking about Yaakov Avinu wanting to bless Ephraim and Manasseh, and the blessing came through a malach. Right? Yeah. So there's this debate, is Am Yisrael subject to the mazalot, or are they just subject to a Kadosh Baruch Hu's direct shefa?
Beautiful question.
And there are debates in the Talmud. Forgive, I don't have the best memory for details, so I can't say I recall the Tanaim who are speaking, but there are Tanaim who say, no, we have no mazal. There are others who say we do have a mazal, and in fact, if we did have a mazal, it would be Aquarius, the Dli. But in terms of this is my understanding,
because of water,
because of Aquarius, we have Torah, and by the way, our holy day is Saturday, which is ruled by Saturn. In the ancient world, Saturn rules Aquarius. These are like a little remezim, but on a deeper level, this is my understanding of how to reconcile this process to the degree that we are really bittul to the divine will. To the degree that through our actions we are not creating din in the world, then we get more of that direct channel from above. This, enod milvado. And yet, it's as much as Ein Od Milvado is true, it's true from the divine perspective, always. But from down here, if we are behaving in a way we're out of alignment with the divine will as individuals and as a nation, then the forces of din come into effect. And there is kind of a spiritual natural law, just like there are physical laws of nature, gravity, all these things. And just like we talk about Kriyat Yam Suf was a violation of physical law from above, so too there's spiritual law of how the divine will is manifest in our realms of reality down here. And there is a framework, Mizgeret, and the Mazalot and the Malachim are the emissaries, the vehicles, these energetic emissaries for this spiritual natural law. And astrology does a really good job of being able to talk about that level. Astrology can talk about the mazal that we are, it can talk about our gilgulic issues that we're bringing into the world. It can show us where we need to work. It can show us things that if we actually start to fix, can enable us to transcend our own mazalot, our own astrological and angelic forces. But obviously, it can't tell you whether that's going to happen because that's a free will kind of thing. Though you can see who's going to have maybe an easier go of it, who's going to have a harder go of it. This is at least my understanding and my perception. And I do believe there is a level. For example, a great story in the Midrash or in the Agadah. Do we reach 40?
No, it's fine.
Okay, so let me just leave this. A great story. Once again, I forgot the Tana, but there was a non-Jewish sorceress who went up to a great Tana. I want to say it's Chanina ben Dosa, but I might be wrong. And she started taking the dust from under his feet in order to do some kind of ritual, working with angels and astrological forces, in order to curse him. And he said to her, "Take as much dust as you want." And he pretty much said to her, "Ein Od Milvado." And the meta commentary on the text is, but that's Chanina ben Dosa. And he's at Tzaddik Amor. Meaning that woman did have the ability to interfere with and do damage to him. But because of the level at which he was living in his consciousness and in his purity and relationship with the divine, he was not vulnerable to her. But for those not on the level, we might have been vulnerable. So from that point of view, the Talmud does acknowledge that these forces are real. Otherwise, what would the people doing Avdei Kochavim, what would they be doing if it wasn't real?
So let me ask you the question and this will have to be our final question because we're running out of time, although I'm really enjoying this. Let me ask it in a different way. Let's take somebody who's not so involved in the religious practice, a traditional Jew, and something's bothering him in his life, and he wants to ask God to fix it for him, or to help him. So he has two choices. He can either pray to God, but his connection is not so strong, or he can go to a tzaddik, like a mikubal in London. We had lots of mikubalim that used to, so-called mikubalim that used to come to London, and the whole community will run to them to get brachot, because you're going to a tzaddik, he's like an angel. He's like the status of an angel. He's much closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so he's able to funnel the blessings.
Right. He's able to manipulate the divine structures.
Based on his own merit. So which is better? Which works better for the person who's not practicing?
Which works better? Well, first and foremost, we should always turn to Kadosh Baruch Hu.
Right.
First and foremost.
Right.
I don't know if it's an either or kind of thing. I mean, I would say we should always be praying to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. We should always be praying for this divine influx that violates the whole structure that was created by a Kadosh Baruch Hu. We should all be praying for that. And I would also say it doesn't hurt to understand the mazal that we have when we come into the world. And what are the remezim of the tikkunim we need to work on, and how do we work with? And I don't think it has to be either or. In fact, I think we should utilize all the resources at our disposal because life is hard, and it's no simple thing to develop an authentic, living relationship with the divine, right? What do you think about that?
I think you're right. But I think my gut feeling tells me that often we turn to the tzaddik because it's an easier, it's a more comfortable way than having to do the work to really connect with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Right. It's like a shortcut, because who am I to do the work that he's done to be able to get to where he is? Let me just use his protection.
And I'm gonna, well, first of all, if the Baal Shem were walking the earth or the Ari were here, I wouldn't hesitate to ask for some help.
Right.
The one thing from a psychological point of view is it's not always so easy to know who is a tzaddik. There are many people who would want to present oneself as such for all kinds of reasons. This is and it's very tempting to project onto someone something that because we want to see it, through our own yearning and belief, we put this on them. And I see many examples of people seeking guidance in their life, assuming that there's Ruach HaKodesh,
right.
But what you're getting is like some infallible human who's very special,
right.
Giving over information with this person, assuming that this is transcended from the divine. So I would not at all, this is not a statement to say I do not have emunah hachamim and emunah tzaddikim, but I also think there are pitfalls everywhere.
So
that's a real one.
If you didn't have a PhD in tzaddikim,
right.
How would you discern,
right, who's real,
the right one to go to, and maybe the less appropriate?
Oh, well, how about this? This is something I don't want to pretend to know the answer to that, except to say I do love the Baal Shem Tov. He's if I were to have a Rebbe, he would be my Rebbe, I would say. Right. And through Rev Pinchas of Koretz, we have a teaching. Rev Pinchas was one of his early directors, top, almost more of a peer even though Rev Pinchas considered the Baal Shem Tov his Rebbe. The Baal Shem Tov said that if somebody's telling you that they've conquered their own pride, their own ga'ava, that they're beyond the temptation of ga'ava, the Baal Shem Tov said you should be very skeptical. And this was a story of people when the Baal Shem was on his deathbed. They asked him, Rebbe, how are we going to know who's real? And he said, ask them this question, right? And about ga'ava. And they went around and they got different, ask if there's a segula for ga'ava, ask if they've transcended ga'ava. And when they got to Rav Pinchas says, I struggle with the same question every day of my life, but we can work on that together. And the story goes, they said, that's our Rebbe.
I love it.
So look, I think there are a lot of very well-meaning people here. The Seer Blubland says that the desire to be a tzaddik is the greatest of all tavot. And he said, but when you're a simple person, you're not even there yet. But when you get to be a big neshama, whatever that means, then it becomes a very difficult tava. And when the Baal Shem Tov was asked to reveal himself in the world, and not just do his avodat Hashem b'tznuah with his wife in the mountains as an innkeeper, he and his wife prayed and fasted for 3 days so that decree would be erased. And he was told, no, this is for you, and if you don't do it, we're going to remove from you all the levels and all the knowledge and all the wisdom that you've acquired. And he said, oh, okay. And he went out in the world. But this idea is, I think, well, I don't know. Okay, I'll leave it like that. I don't really want to say more than that.
Okay, so
how does that sound?
It sounds great. It sounds good food for thought. And I want to leave our blessed audience with another food for thought, because the whole of this parasha was about building our vessels so that we can collect and retain the blessings that God wants to give us. And I wanted just to leave you guys with this mashal, which really speaks to me. And that is, and it's just my view on things, don't take it that this is how it is, but my view is that when it rains, then it rains everywhere the same. I mean, whether you're standing here or there, you're going to get the same rainfall. So what is the difference between one person, what they can collect, and another person? it's the vessel they come out of the rain with. So if someone comes out with a little cup, he's going to get a little cup worth of water. Somebody comes up with a big bucket, he's going to get a bucket of water. Somebody who comes out with a little thimble, he's going to get a little thimble of water. And never somebody who doesn't believe in the rain, the benefits of the rain, goes out with an umbrella and collects nothing at all. But in this simple mashal, it really focuses our attention that it's up to us in our lives to build the vessels that will collect and retain these blessings. And my blessing to all of us is that we will have the wisdom to know what it takes to build those vessels. So I wish you a wonderful week. Thank you so much for being my special guest. I really, really enjoyed it. And I know that all the psychotherapists out there will enjoy it as well.
Perhaps.
And all the Baal Shem Tov followers will enjoy it. But thank you so much, and please consider being my guest in another parasha somewhere in the distant future.
Okay.
Thank you so much. God bless.